The relentless spring rain drummed against the weathered pine coffin as Willow Zander watched the last of her dreams being lowered into the cold Montana earth, her tears mingling with the downpour, as if the heavens themselves mourned alongside her. The year was 1878, and at 26, she had become what so many women in the Montana Territory dreaded: a widow with a small homestead, crushing debts, and a 4-year-old daughter who didn't understand why her father wasn't coming home. "Mrs. Zander," the preacher said gently, closing his Bible as the other mourners began to disperse, "if there's anything the congregation can do." Willow clutched her daughter Emma's small hand tighter. "Thank you, Preacher Collins, but we'll manage." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Thomas had been dead less than a week, pneumonia taking him swift and merciless, but the reality of their situation had already become painfully clear. The small cattle ranch they'd built over 5 years of marriage was mortgaged to the bank. The spring calving had gone poorly. And Willow had exactly 3 months to make a payment she couldn't possibly afford. As they walked back to their wagon, her neighbor Martha Walsh touched her elbow. "You're welcome to stay with us, dear, at least until you decide what's to be done." "We have our home," Willow replied, more stubborn than practical. "And the cattle still need tending." Martha's expression showed what she thought of a woman trying to run a ranch alone, but she simply nodded and stepped back. The ride home stretched 6 miles across rolling prairie, now verdant with spring growth. Emma fell asleep against Willow's side as the horses plodded steadily toward the modest homestead that had once felt like the center of all her happiness. Now it loomed like a monument to everything she stood to lose. That night, after tucking Emma into bed with stories of angels watching over her father, Willow sat alone at the kitchen table. Thomas's ledger lay open before her, each entry in his careful handwriting a reminder of his absence. The numbers told a grim story: the drought last summer, the cattle they'd lost to winter storms, the loans they'd taken for equipment. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to the empty room. Dawn found her still at the table, her candle burned to a stub, having made lists and calculations until her eyes burned. She would sell Thomas's horse. She would slaughter 1 cow for meat to last through summer. She would make and sell butter in town. She would pray for a miracle. The following weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion. Willow rose before the sun each day, donned Thomas's old work clothes, and struggled through tasks she'd only observed before. Her hands blistered and cracked from mending fences. Her back ached from hauling water. Her eyes stung from crying silently after Emma was asleep. June arrived hot and relentless. The creek that crossed their property began to shrink, and the grass grew sparse in the pastures. Willow drove their remaining 23 cattle to the North Range herself. Emma perched in front of her on the saddle. Each night she fell into bed too tired to dream, yet morning always arrived too soon. She was gathering eggs one sweltering afternoon when Emma came running from where she'd been playing near the barn. "Mama, someone's coming." Willow straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. A lone rider approached from the east, his form wavering in the heat rising from the prairie. Instinctively, she reached for the shotgun Thomas had always kept by the door. The rider slowed as he neared the house. He sat tall in the saddle atop a magnificent buckskin gelding, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his denim trousers and faded blue shirt, telling of many miles traveled. "Stay behind me, Emma," Willow said, holding the shotgun across her body, not pointing but ready. The stranger reined to a stop a respectful distance from the house and raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon, madam." "This is private property," Willow called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, madam, I expect it is." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and hair the color of wheat. "Name's Holt Jameson. I'm looking for work." Willow's grip tightened on the shotgun. "There's no work here. Begging your pardon, but I passed your north pasture, saw a few of your cattle had gotten themselves into the creek bed. Won't be long before they're stuck in mud when that water drops lower." His voice was deep with a slight Texas drawl, his blue eyes direct but not challenging. Willow's heart sank. She checked the herd just yesterday, but clearly not well enough. "I can handle my own stock. Never said you couldn't." His smile was brief but genuine. "But every ranch I worked needed extra hands come summer. Thought maybe yours might too." "I can't afford to hire anyone," Willow admitted, her pride warring with practicality. "I don't need much," Holt replied. "Just a place to bed down and meals." "Been riding north from Colorado, looking to settle somewhere that feels right." He glanced around at the modest homestead. "This seems like good country." "It is when it rains," Willow said dryly. Emma peeked around her skirts, curiosity overcoming shyness. "Do you know how to ride horses real fast?" Holt's smile broadened. "Fast enough to catch the wind sometimes, little lady," Willow hesitated. Having a stranger on the property made her uneasy, but the cattle needed tending and the barn roof had begun to leak, and 100 other tasks required attention. "1 week," she said finally. "You can stay 1 week, Mr. Jameson. There's a cot in the tack room." "Much obliged, Mrs. Zander, Willow Zander. This is my daughter, Emma. Pleased to meet you both." He replaced his hat, touching the brim respectfully. "I'll just see to those cattle, then get my gear settled if that suits you," Willow nodded, watching as he mounted and rode toward the north pasture. Only when he disappeared over the ridge did she realize she'd been holding her breath. "Is he going to stay with us, Mama?" Emma asked, her small face brightening with the novelty. "Just for a little while," Willow answered, unsure whether she'd just made a terrible mistake. That evening, Willow added an extra potato to the pot and set 3 places at the table. She'd spent the afternoon watching from the porch as Holt Jameson not only retrieved the straying cattle, but also repaired a section of fence and cleaned out the choked water trough. He worked efficiently without fanfare, as if determined to prove his worth. When he appeared at the back door at sunset, he'd removed his hat and washed up at the pump. His hair, damp at the temples, curled slightly. "Mr. Jameson," she greeted him formally. "Supper's nearly ready." "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Zander. Those are fine-looking cattle you have. Good breeding stock." They ate together, conversation sparse but not uncomfortable. Holt answered Emma's endless questions about his horse named Chief and where he'd traveled. He'd come from Texas originally, worked ranches in Colorado and Wyoming, and once drove a herd all the way to Nebraska. After Emma went to bed, Willow sat across from him at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "Why here?" she asked bluntly. "There are bigger spreads that could pay real wages." Holt considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Been working for others most of my life. Thought maybe it's time to find a place of my own." He paused. "This valley reminds me of somewhere I knew as a boy." "Before the war changed everything, you fought?" Willow asked, noting he would have been young during the Civil War, last year of it, was barely 18. His expression clouded briefly. "Saw enough to know I prefer making things grow to tearing them down." Willow found herself studying his hands, strong, capable, with calluses that spoke of honest work. Thomas's hands had been similar. "I should warn you," she said, "the bank may foreclose on this place come August if I can't make the payment. I wouldn't count on staying long." Holt met her gaze steadily. "All due respect, Mrs. Zander, but I've seen land through harder times than these. If you're willing to fight for this place, I'd like to help you do it." Something in his quiet confidence kindled a fragile hope in Willow's chest. "I'm willing," she said softly. The following days fell into a rhythm. Holt rose before dawn, taking on the heaviest chores without being asked. He mended fences, repaired the barn roof, and doctored a heifer with an infected foot. In the afternoons, he helped Emma construct an elaborate playhouse from scrap lumber, his patience seemingly endless as she directed the project with the seriousness of a railroad baron. Willow found herself watching him when he wasn't looking the way the sun had burnished his skin to bronze. How he always seemed to know what needed doing without being told. At night, she caught herself listening for his movements in the barn, aware of his presence in a way that made her both uneasy and comforted. One evening, a week after his arrival, Willow approached him as he sat on the porch steps whittling a small wooden horse. "Your week's up, Mr. Jameson," she said, smoothing her skirt nervously. He looked up, his knife pausing mid-stroke. "Yes, madam, I was thinking." Willow took a deep breath. The fence on the west border still needs work and the garden's coming in heavy. "If you wanted to stay on a while longer, I wouldn't object." A smile spread slowly across his features. "I'd be obliged, Mrs. Zander." He returned to his whittling, adding, "And it's Holt, if you don't mind. Mr. Jameson was my father." "Holt," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "Then I suppose you should call me Willow." As June melted into July, the drought tightened its grip on the valley. Ranchers began driving their herds north in search of better grazing. Twice, Willow rode into town for supplies, returning with news of foreclosures and families moving on. "Carmichael's selling out," she reported one evening as she and Holt sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky crimson. "Taking what he can get and heading to Oregon." Holt nodded, his expression pensive. "Been thinking about your cattle. If we could get them to the high meadow beyond Fisher's Creek, there's still good grass there." "That's 10 miles north," Willow objected, "and we'd have to cross McGinty's land. He's never been neighborly." "I rode up that way yesterday," Holt admitted. "McGinty's gone, place is empty." Willow stared at him. "You've been scouting options. Seems prudent with things getting harder." He met her gaze directly. "Your husband built something worth fighting for here, Willow." "I don't like seeing folks give up when there might be another way." His words touched something deep within her, the determination that had kept her going these past months, the refusal to surrender what she and Thomas had built together. "We'd need to move them tomorrow," she said decisively. "Before the creek dries completely?" Holt nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, madam." They set out at dawn, Emma secured in front of Holt on Chief's saddle. The cattle moved sluggishly in the early morning heat, reluctant to leave familiar territory. By midday, they'd reached Fisher's Creek, now reduced to a trickle through a muddy bed. "We'll rest here," Holt decided, helping Emma down from the saddle. "Let them drink what they can." Willow dismounted gratefully, her legs stiff from hours of riding. She spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood and unpacked the lunch she'd prepared. Emma immediately began constructing a miniature dam in the creek bed while the adults ate. "How long have you been on your own?" Holt asked, his voice carefully neutral. Willow swallowed a bite of bread. "Thomas died in April. Pneumonia." Holt nodded, offering no empty condolences for which she was grateful. "He chose good land. Once this drought breaks, this valley will flourish again. If we can hold on that long," Willow sighed. "The payment's due in 3 weeks. Even with saving on wages by having you work for room and board, I'm still short." Holt was quiet for a moment. "I've been meaning to speak to you about that." He set down his plate and reached into his shirt pocket, withdrawing a small pouch. "I've got savings, not a fortune, but enough to help." Willow stared at the pouch he offered. "I can't take your money." "Consider it an investment," he suggested, "in the future of the ranch." "Why would you do that?" she asked, genuinely perplexed. "You barely know us." Holt's gaze shifted to Emma, who was happily patting mud into shapes. "Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I see something worth being part of." His eyes returned to Willow's, unexpectedly intense. "Or maybe I just believe in you, Willow Zander." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. No one had believed in her like that since Thomas died, perhaps not even Thomas himself, who had always tried to shield her from the harsher realities of ranch life. "I'll think about it," she said finally, unable to accept or refuse outright. They resumed their drive after the brief rest, pushing the cattle steadily northward. By evening, they reached the high meadow Holt had described, a natural basin cupped between gentle hills, where grass still grew thick and green, fed by an underground spring. "It's perfect," Willow breathed, surveying the unexpected oasis. "It'll do for a month or so," Holt agreed. "By then, hopefully the rains will come." They made camp at the edge of the meadow, building a small fire as the stars emerged in the darkening sky. Emma fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's adventure, curled in a blanket near the fire's warmth. Willow sat beside Holt, watching the flames dance. "You've done so much for us," she said softly. "I don't know how to repay you." "Not looking for repayment," he replied, his profile strong in the firelight, "just doing what seems right." Impulsively, Willow reached out and covered his hand with hers. "Thank you." Holt turned his palm upward, his fingers gently curling around hers. Neither spoke, but something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of possibility, of futures not yet written. The weeks that followed were among the busiest Willow could remember. With the cattle safely grazing in the high meadow, they turned their attention to other pressing tasks. Holt repaired the ancient windmill that had stood idle for years, bringing water flowing into the storage tank again. They harvested the garden's bounty, with Willow teaching Emma how to preserve vegetables for the winter ahead. Bit by bit, the ranch began to feel revitalized. Willow found herself smiling more often, planning for next spring, next year. And always, Holt was there, steady, capable, gradually becoming as essential to the rhythm of their days as the sunrise. The evening before the bank payment was due, Willow finally accepted Holt's offer of financial help. They would make the payment together as partners in the ranch's future. The decision both terrified and exhilarated her. "I'll pay you back," she promised as they sat on the porch after Emma was asleep, "every cent with interest." "I know you will," he said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "There's something I need to tell you, Willow, something I should have said sooner." The seriousness in his tone made her heart falter. "What is it? When I came here, I wasn't just passing through." He looked out at the darkened landscape, his expression unreadable. "I'd heard about this place, about you." Willow frowned. "What do you mean?" "I knew Thomas," Holt said quietly. "Not well, but we worked a cattle drive together 3 years back from Montana to Kansas City." He talked about his wife, his little girl, this ranch, said it was the finest place a man could hope to build a life. Surprise and confusion washed over Willow. "Why didn't you tell me?" "At first, I wasn't sure it was the same place. Then, when I realized it was." He turned to face her, moonlight silvering his features. "I was afraid you'd send me away if you thought I came out of some misplaced sense of obligation." "Did you?" Willow asked, her voice barely audible. Holt shook his head slowly. "I came because I remembered how Thomas talked about this valley, like it was the closest thing to heaven a man could find on earth. But I stayed because of you, Willow. Because in just a few months, you've shown more courage and determination than most men I've known in a lifetime." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "Most days I'm terrified. Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Holt said gently. "It's about facing it anyway." Their eyes held for a long moment. Then, with aching slowness, Holt leaned forward. Willow met him halfway, their lips touching in a kiss as tentative as it was profound. His hand came up to cradle her cheek, calloused fingers unexpectedly tender against her skin. When they drew apart, Willow's heart was racing. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "Neither did I," Holt admitted. "But I'm not sorry for it." "No," Willow agreed, a smile breaking through her uncertainty. "Neither am I." They rode into town together the next morning, Emma chattering excitedly about seeing her friend Mary from church. The bank manager's eyebrows rose slightly when Willow counted out the full payment, but he said nothing about her companion. The mortgage note was stamped paid for another 6 months, a reprieve that felt like victory. As August gave way to September, the first autumn rains finally arrived, gentle but persistent. The creek beds filled again, the pastures began to green, and a cautious optimism spread through the valley's remaining ranchers. One rain-soaked afternoon, Willow found Holt in the barn, examining a set of plans he'd drawn on butcher paper. "What's this?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "Been thinking we could expand the barn," he explained, tracing lines with his finger. "Add a proper workshop here, more stall space." Come spring, we might want to think about breeding horses as well as cattle, diversify a bit. Willow studied him thoughtfully. You're making long-term plans. Holt met her gaze steadily. I'd like to, yes, with your permission. The implication hung between them, weighty with possibility. Holt Jameson, Willow said carefully, are you asking to court me? A slow smile spread across his face. I reckon I am, though I'm making a mess of it. He took her hands in his. Willow Zander, you're the strongest woman I've ever known. And if you'd allow it, I'd like to stand beside you not because you need someone, but because I need you. Your spirit, your determination, your heart. Tears pricked behind Willow's eyes. People will talk, they'll say it's too soon after Thomas. Let them talk, Holt said softly. We know the truth. That life is too precious and too uncertain to waste a moment of it on others' opinions. Willow thought of Thomas, then his laugh, his dreams for this land, his love for their daughter. She would always carry him in her heart. But that heart, she realized, was big enough to hold new love alongside cherished memories. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that very much. The courtship that followed was conducted under the watchful, often amused eyes of their neighbors. Holt moved from the barn to the town's small hotel, riding out each day to work the ranch and returning to town, each evening a concession to propriety that neither particularly cared about but both respected. Emma, initially confused by the arrangement, soon embraced the idea with characteristic enthusiasm, especially when Holt promised her a pony of her own once they were officially a family. On the first Sunday in November, with autumn's gold touching the cottonwoods along the creek, Willow Zander became Willow Jameson in a simple ceremony at the town's white clapboard church. Emma served as flower girl, scattering dried rose petals with solemn dedication. Martha Walsh cried openly, whispering to anyone who would listen that Thomas would have approved, that he would have wanted Willow to find happiness again. That evening, as twilight gathered around their small homestead, Holt carried Emma exhausted from celebration to her bed. Willow watched from the doorway as he tucked the blankets around her sleeping form and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Later, as they stood together on the porch, Holt's arm warm around her waist, Willow gazed out at the land that had nearly broken her, that she had fought so hard to keep. Do you think we can make it work? She asked softly. The ranch, I mean. Holt followed her gaze, taking in the weathered barn, the mended fences, the distant silhouettes of cattle against the darkening sky. I do, he said confidently. But even if we couldn't, we'd find another dream to build together. Willow turned in his arms, looking up into the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. When you first rode up that day, I nearly sent you away. I'm mighty glad you didn't, Holt murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. So am I. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, feeling his arms tighten around her. When they drew apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Promise me something. Anything, he said without hesitation. Promise me we'll face whatever comes together, the good years and the hard ones. Holt's voice was solemn as he replied, I promise you, Willow Jameson, today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow. They stood together as night embraced the valley, two people who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, strength, and the courage to begin again. The ranch that had once seemed a burden now stretched before them, full of promise, not because the challenges had disappeared, but because they would face them side by side. The years that followed would indeed bring both bounty and hardship. The ranch would prosper, then struggle through another drought, then prosper again. Emma would grow into a spirited young woman with her mother's determination and her stepfather's easy smile. She would be joined by two half-brothers, born in the springs of 1880 and 1882, who would inherit their father's talent with horses and their mother's love of the land. The Jameson Ranch would become known throughout the territory for its fine cattle and finer quarter horses. Holt and Willow would work side by side through it all, their partnership deepening into something rare and precious, a love forged in adversity and strengthened by shared purpose. And sometimes, On summer evenings when the work was done, they would sit together on the porch where they had first begun to know each other, watching the sun set over the valley they both cherished. In those quiet moments, they would remember how it had all begun with a widow's tears, a stranger's arrival, and a promise of forever that had changed everything.